Hello and welcome to the King Heroes Journey podcast. My name is Beth Martins. I'm with Matt Presti again today. Feel really fortunate to have another meeting on a subject that's very important to me. Welcome, Matt.
Good morning, Beth. Happy belated Mother's Day.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I was a shut-in completely yesterday. I thought it was very interesting that we had forest fires, and I woke up yesterday, the sky was yellow and it was completely
Mm,
like the door was seeping in smoke all day long. I had a little bit of a irritation and cough going on, so I thought it was kind of
Oh my.
apropos for our timing in and one of your lines of work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
What part of Canada are you in again?
Winnipeg, Manitoba, so South Central Prairies. When
Okay.
Yeah.
Wasn't that a Vancouver forest fire?
Um,
Or
from
were
the
there
little bit
probably
I
more than just one then?
It looks like they've got fires all over the place, like Quebec for sure,
Okay. Yeah,
and it looks like Manitoba as well. So I think that's where they came from. But yeah,
gotcha.
I couldn't even open the door or the window yesterday. It was just total shut in.
It's
So
called climate carditis now.
something like that. I know, I know.
Right.
Yeah, high winds, which I know are not good for fires or are good for spreading fires. Another way
Hmm.
to say it, and to desiccate the earth. So I'm just
Yep.
getting Rockfin going while we're setting up here, and there's a Rockfin link if anybody would like to jump in. And Thor at the door is here. Good morning to you as well. Yeah, this is an early stream for me. I normally wait until I've got like my full faculties, but I think we can risk it here. And John Wills is in the house as well. Welcome. Nice to see you. So we are also, I'll just let you know, live on Rumble. I'm going to grab a link for you guys there because that's a good platform. And here it is. So there's always a little bit of a setup. I do aspire to creating some kind of intro for the waiting room, but so far we just dive in and get started.
Sounds good.
Right on. And there's the Rumble link if anyone would like to be over there. I consistently hear, by the way, that people either can't comment to me or they comment and it looks like I don't see it, or they subscribe and they unsubscribe. I noticed I had been unsubscribed to a bunch of things that I was up to yesterday on YouTube as well. So just keep an eye on it. If you happen to be here, then the best thing is to go to my website, bethmartins.com, and sign up for an archetype quiz, for example, or the free training that is coming up. And I'm going to just quickly share a link for that because that's what's high on my list and my mind right now. The
Mhm.
Getting Off the Nurture's Pendulum Swing Training. And I've actually had fantastic feedback that this is so needed. People are like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that was a thing, but that describes me to a T. So if you'd like
Yeah.
to, Mhm. Yeah, if you'd like to sign up for no charge at all, this is a completely free training, then you can hit that link in the chat. And it's also in the notes if you're seeing it after the fact.
Could I
So,
take a moment to just make a recommendation?
yes.
Guys, get this book.
Oh, thank you. Here, I'll make that big.
You'll love it. Okay, it's really good. Lori and I are enjoying it very much. Now, there's one thing that I have to take issue with. It's
All
one
right.
quote that I've found so far, and I don't know, where am I here? Page 200 and something. But it was, I believe, from well, I actually forget the chapter, but the quote is, "The sexiest man I've known can hold it together and be self-controlled, immune to the feminine storms of chaos." Now, Lori made it a point to read that out loud to me when she came across it, and I just have to say that nobody can contain my woman, least of all me. So, if you can't hold it together, guys, probably just means you've got a strong woman. But keep trying because you want to be that sexy guy. So I'm working on it, Beth. I'm working on it.
That's hilarious. I'm doing my audiobook, and when I read that line, I'm like, am I still down with that? Little things have shifted, and everything is so highly nuanced, is what I noticed. So making any blanket truths always ends up having some kind of, water through your hands effect. But
Yeah.
you have
But
to
the
start.
feminine storms of chaos, I mean, that right there could be a band name for an all chick band. That just look out, because they're going to rock the stage, you know. Just loved it. Great quote. Anyways.
Oh, very good, very good. I have one other favorite one in there, and it was when did you get? Yeah, you got through. You might have got through the nurturer for sure,
Hmm.
and so when my mom was cleaning out my dad's basement, which it was her basement too, and
Hmm.
I talked about the supernatural chaos. So that's another version of the same feminine that I make myself laugh out loud every time I read that.
It's good stuff. Good
Oh,
stuff.
thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that recommendation a lot. I'm going to make sure and introduce you properly for those that are not familiar with Matt Presti's work. We had a chance to see each other in person in Mexico this year at an Acapulco. It was a fabulous meeting of great souls,
Hmm.
fabulous conversations, especially over the pre-breakfast coffee. And so Matt is a Metascientist, a musician, which I love your music. There's really great playlists on your YouTube. And also you can buy a whole like 137 song download, which I have yet to do. And he's a patriot, a philosopher, a poet, practitioner of universal law, natural science, and living philosophy. Also an audio and video producer, broadcaster, and host of the Exploration of Consciousness TEC. He's the former director of operations and president of the University of Science and Philosophy, which is formerly the Walter Russell Foundation, January 1st, 2015 to August 10, 2021. He is currently the CEO of Universal Power LLC and a volunteer firefighter on Montauk Rural Fire Department in Dent County, Missouri, and Rockfish County and Nelson County, Virginia as well. And you got a recent promotion, Matt.
I did. Yeah. On Montauk Rural Fire Department. After 7 years, nearly 7 years of service, I was promoted to lieutenant.
Nice,
So,
nice. That's awesome. Congratulations. And I
well, thank
was,
you.
yeah, I thought how apropos it was that, to me, firefighters are really high in the nurturer, right? You told me at one point it's, you go for the rescue, the people, the pets, and the property in that order, right?
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's human life and life in general, you know, but obviously human life first, and pets, and then just try to, save as much of the property as possible.
Right, exactly.
Mhm.
And if you're willing to jump into a burning building to rescue any life form whatsoever, never mind property, which people really end up missing a lot, then
Mhm.
that really is indication of the nurturer archetype, which is my, I won't say new fascination. It's definitely not new. This has been going on and on and on, but it's top of my mind right now because we're running that training tomorrow. And I just wanted to say hello to a few people. Jen Pepler is saying congrats. And yes, Jennifer, we can see the chat on Rumble. So luckily that comes through on my StreamYard. And Michelle's saying congrats as well. Hello, Yvonne. Welcome. And I'm glad you guys have all made it. Sane Lady as well. Awesome. One of my local House of Free Will members. And you just gave Matt's info to your client yesterday, a young science teacher. Nice.
Hmm.
So we're going to be talking about the nurturer archetype and how that shows up in the masculine, because I don't know if it's true for you, Matt, but often when you say the word nurturer, people almost always think women,
Mhm.
right? Raising the kids, cleaning the house, keeping things all nice and sweet and lovely. But there is a very strong side to masculine side to that nurturer archetype. And it does have a different expression. So I've been witnessing you, I had a chance to meet you. I see how you are in your community. I noticed, again, your role as a firefighter and see how you're really nurturing people. You nurture me. You came and told people to buy my book, and it's a beautiful quality. I really love that. And there's lots of pitfalls, and there's also a lot of gifts. So we're going to talk about all of the ins and outs of that. And hello, Michael. I'm glad you're here as well. So, what inspired? Let's talk about just your role as a firefighter first, and what inspired you. What was that moment? How did it look? Was there a turning point when you decided you were going to become a firefighter?
Well, I have to go back to the beginning for that. At 2 years old, probably before the age of 2, I would hear our fire station was about 3 blocks away from where I grew up. And before the fire trucks would roll out of the firehouse, they would always sound, and that would let traffic know that they're getting ready to come out of the station. So I would hear this siren, and at 2 years old, my mom loves to tell this story because it embarrasses me a little bit, but just to say that I was her wild child of 7 kids. I was the one that was always exploring and running away, if you will, but not because of problems at home, but just because I was such an explorer. So I would hear this siren, and it was the desire to go see what the source of that noise was. And as a 2-year-old, I remember climbing out of my crib, hanging out of the bedroom window and dropping to the ground. And I walked, and I guess I was still in diapers, or maybe I wasn't. I don't know. It was a long time ago, but I crossed a 4-lane highway and went 3 blocks and got to the source of that noise, which was the fire station up the street. So being brought home in a police car, my mom, obviously called the police because she couldn't find me. And so she likes to tell that story. And it happened about, I don't know, 5 or 10 times, somewhere in between there, between the ages of 2 and 4. So I would leave the house and get brought home in a police car. But I was always trying to find, what is that noise? I wanted to see what it was. And it actually caused me to climb out of the crib. And that was my first big adventure for little Bilbo here. But so I found a love for that. And in my budding years, when I started riding the bike and whatnot, 8 or 9 years old at that point, I used to ride up to the fire station, and I would sit there outside of the fire station with the firemen, and they would sit there and they'd smoke cigarettes and talk and laugh and tell jokes. And I would just hang out. I would park my bike and I'd sit right on the ledge next to them. And they eventually got used to me, kind of like a dog or something at the fire station hangs out, just a little kid from down the road. But so they invited me to dinner a couple different times. I got to help them and, help mess around with, dragging hose or something like that when they would do trainings. And so I was introduced to it at a very young age, but I really, and they used to, every 4th of July, we used to get on the back of one of the fire trucks. They'd take all the hose out and they would give the kids rides on the fire truck from like 1982 to 1986, I think was, or maybe it was late 70s, but I was pretty young then. But eventually, because of insurance companies, they stopped doing that, which sucked because that was one of the funnest points of every year that would come. We got to light off fireworks on the front of the house there, but also ride the fire truck legally, and unfortunately, that's just one of the things with, big insurance, things like that. Like they'll take diving boards out of swimming pools because they can't afford the insurance if it's beyond a certain height, which they did at our local pool as well. But nonetheless, I had no real special interest to be a firefighter. And it would be many years later that at the age of 45 here in Salem, Missouri, I relocated from St. Louis back when I was, I'd say 32 years old, around 2002. So I was sitting at the American Legion, and a friend of mine came in and sat down, and he was the assistant fire chief on the Montauk Rural Fire Department. Cliff, if you're out there, Cliff. Hey, Cliff, what's up, buddy? But he mentioned to me, he goes, hey, you ever think about firefighting? I said, I used to when I was a kid, but I just never got into it. He goes, well, Montauk Rural Fire Department could really use some help, and it's a good way to give back to your community. And I said, well, Cliff, I don't know, man. I'm pretty busy with the university and stuff. I'll have to let you know. I said, let me think on it for a couple days. And so I went home and I mentioned it to Lori, and, it just started eating at me. I'm like, I'm making the best money I've made pretty much in my life. At this point, I have a very stable job. I'm enjoying the things that I do. And I'm just very inspired by a lot of things. So when that offer came, it was just a couple days. I was sure it's something I wanted to do, and I'm just like, the giving back to the community part was what hit me, because for so long I was very angry about my community buying into the Bush years and the Iraq war years. And, I kind of felt like they just didn't get it, and so, but it wasn't what I would find when I met with people on a personal one-to-one level. Yeah, there's politics in every community, but there's also good people who, you know, do things for free. Basically, it's called volunteering. And they volunteer because they want to give back to their community. It's not, you don't volunteer for selfish reasons unless you're the flip side of the nurturer. The shadow side would probably do that for selfish reasons. But genuinely, my experience with especially the fire departments I've served with turn out to be full of people that really just want to help out. And it's selfless service to one another. And so I got on that department in August of 2017. And just a year and a half or so later, working in Virginia, setting up the Russell Museum, 6 months or more at a time. I was there, especially in 2019. I was in Virginia for 8 months. They sent out a flyer where I was a neighborhood I was staying in, Afton Mountain, Virginia, and it said volunteers wanted. And it was like perfect timing for me, because I didn't want to lose continual service or have a gap in my service. I didn't want to be in Virginia and miss 4 months of being able to. So this was an opportunity. I'm like, well, this is kind of cool. I can stay in service continually. And so I went down to their meeting, and 90 days later, I was a full-fledged member of Rockfish Valley Volunteer Fire Department. And so it allowed me to stay in service. And I just want to say too, and I'm sure we'll get into this in long answer, but the people that I get to run these calls with are some of the best people, real salt of the earth folks. I mean, they'll give you their shirt off their back if you needed it to stay warm, and it's no skin off their back to do it. They run businesses, they have families, but they make time for this. And so to me, it was always just, it wasn't what I expected when I got into it. It was really an amazing opportunity. I'm so glad that I did it, because according to one of the trainers, that when I took my basic fire, he said to the class, just so you all know, he said, volunteerism is at an all-time low in the United States. And so I found that very concerning too, but we can talk about that more. But that's pretty much how I got into it. And I still serve with both departments today. And I'm only a lieutenant on the Montauk. There's couple great lieutenants on the Rockfish Valley side that, I got to give props to all these folks for doing the work that they do. And they're all inspiring.
Yeah, they really are. There's a kind of aura. I know it also becomes quite mystified. And then they say with children's stories and books and action figures and that kind of thing, there is a lot of mystique built into it. But I think for good reason in this case, because you're really willing to risk your life, right? Not for your child, not for your brother, not for your mother, but for your community that you don't know. Maybe it's for a drug addict. Maybe it's for somebody who made bad choices in their life. Maybe it's a result of some crime that was committed. And there are innocent people there. But, the decision, I think, to put your life on the line is extraordinary. So.
Yeah, just to let you know, we just got a rainstorm come in, so I'm shutting the door, and I might have to shut the window to quiet things down.
Okay, no problem. Take your time.
But yeah, it's, it really is a calling from the heart, that you just want to help your community. And I think from a volunteer perspective too, it's, fire stations are considered to be the hearts of communities around the country, at least in the US and in fact other places as well. But you get such a group together, and I like to say this to people, in any times of trouble, we had a tornado come through Salem, Missouri in 2018. It tore roofs off of homes and down limbs and power lines, and the whole town was without power. Walmart was out of power. I mean, everything was out, and where did everybody meet? Guys in pickup trucks from the farthest reaches of the county. They all met at the fire department in town, and they brought their chainsaws and they brought their 4x4s, four-wheelers, and they went out and they delegated crews to go out and clear roads and streets and help people, so it was a community effort. And that was actually 2017 early. That's one of the reasons why I also took Cliff's invitation to come on the department, because I really wanted to help. I'm like, man, this is the worst storm that's moved through our area in probably decades. And I just saw those trucks and guys at the fire department, and I'm like, I'd really like to help out with that someday. So that was a motivator as well. And I did actually help out. I jumped in on a crew of guys with chainsaw and brought mine. And, we cleared a whole couple front yards of fallen limbs that, were an older couple's home that they couldn't get out to get to the street. So, it's just in times like that the best of humanity comes forward. And so I always like to say, if there's ever a, point where we reach conditions in any country where you're looking for advice or, what can I do kind of situation, there's a disaster, go to your local fire department, because that's the heart of a community, and you're going to be able to team up with some really great people. And it's nobody cares what your orientation is or your politics. We don't run into a burning building and go, hey, are you Republican or Democrat? Do you identify as one of those? We don't ask those questions. There's a human being in there, and that's the motivator to help and assist our fellow man.
That's beautiful. Yeah, there's a lot of good points there. I like it that you said you reached that point in your life where you had something to give back. You were stable in your own maybe income and your life, and you were really actually attracted to that idea of giving back. And that's exactly when it happens. So, being in that place in your life, if there's anybody listening that hasn't come to that point, it just means you're still slaying your own demons and dragons. And that needs to happen, because it's a nurture or shadow if you dive out and try to help before you have stability. Right?
Right.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I mean, you got to reach that point. I think it's the demarcation line, also known as when your cup runneth over. You fulfilled your obligations to yourself, and it's at that point that society is standing there with its hand out. And I don't mean in like going and giving money to homeless guys so he can go buy alcohol. It's the needs of society are always there. And community, I should say, as well. And it's not a mass thing. It's not a movement. It's just the community. It's what you're part of. We're all, we all have our family unit, but then we have the neighborhood unit, we have the city unit and the state unit and the national unit, and then the world unit. And that lines right up with the Russell teachings as well. It's, if you want to help the world, you start at home in yourself, actually. And if you're not right, your family's not going to be right. Your home will be out of order and out of balance. So that's where it all begins. And once you achieve that balance, and it multiplies outward from there, and that's when you can really do things that affect change, like assisting. And you don't have to be physically fit to be a firefighter or volunteer in a fire department. You can help with dinners. You can help with fundraisers. You can do a whole lot of things. Easter egg hunts. There's all kinds of things that benefit kids, that spark their imaginations, and just so many good events, that all different departments are actually, have a forte of different ways in which they raise money, and they can always use help. Whether it's, you could serve biscuits and gravy on a Sunday morning, or whatever it is they do to raise money, and these are usually annual events, and they're always looking for help. So there's lots of ways you can give back that don't involve running into a burning building.
Right. Because not everyone is qualified for that, whether it's their nervous system or their physical fitness or breathing or whatever it is. So yeah, that's a big demand. And you also talked about how, this is a I mean, first of all, I want to just say how it does somehow give faith and hope in humanity, and often comes as a result of crisis of some kind. So here in Manitoba, we have a river that tends to run over, although these days, even in the spring, the floodway, it's just teeny. That's so unheard of. It would always be like just, absolutely swollen with water at this time of year. But when um, you watch people that are doing that kind of work, the crisis brings them together, and it is a place where you gain renewed faith and hope in humanity. Now, do you think that the crisis is needed for that, or are there ways that we can, is it only crisis that's going to bring us together?
Well, that's a great question because it seems like I can't really say that there is anything that brings us together more than that, that at least that I've seen yet. Maybe we're not spiritually advanced to find ways to come together, accepting crises, so it's a good question. But, when I guess the Amish come together when they build a barn for one of their own, they all come together and, the ladies take care of the needs of lunch and feeding and watching the kids while the men raise the beams and smack the hammers with the nails. You see those communal efforts, and some of those things work well. Of course, we've all heard the horror stories of communes in the modern world, which ends up usually being 30, 40 people and only two do the work, and everybody else just kind of lays around. At least I've heard that story many times. But when it comes to like a community volunteer effort, my experience is that um, that's the motivator, is to get up and help. And that doesn't take a crisis, even though we do respond to them, and that's again, it's a great question because uh, what really does motivate people to want to help others, and if you can be motivated without the crisis, then I think you're on that positive side of the nurturer. And I love in your book how you juxtapose between the shadow and the bright light side of these archetypes, because a lot of people, and there's many takes on archetypes. Jung had 12, some have 44. It just depends on what traditions or whatnot that you follow, but that they all have the positive and negative aspects are important too. And I think it doesn't take a crisis necessarily to bring out the best in people.
There's a soundbite right there. I love that. Yeah, and the other motivation is creation and generation. So I am this course might be an example, the Nurturer's Cure, that's going to come up in July with the training tomorrow. I could have waited till there was some thing pressing at me. And in this case, I don't know, people falling down, although that I see all the time, nurturers crashing and burning. And I had one very poignant example, kind of symbolic, a woman who was looking for some help with her nurture archetype, and to get out of that role of helping everybody all the time and abandoning herself in the process.
Mhm.
And so she set this time aside to meet with me. And then 5 minutes before the meeting, her brother dropped off the baby in her arms and unexpectedly just like, oh, you can look after my son with zero notice, and I'll be gone and I'll just be back. And it was just one of those examples of how those cycles go, that the helping spirit, it has to help. It doesn't have a choice. I mean, choice is actually, you do have free will of choice all the time, but because you're so strongly wired for that role of service, then there's a way to really get trapped in that. But yeah, the high road is just hire yourself to create based on a need that maybe hasn't gone full blown crisis yet, or chaos, and do that. And that's, so I'm making trouble for myself now. And it's actually pretty beautiful that I have the nurturer in focus, because I need that memory, right? If I abandon myself right now in the process of trying to help others with the nurture, then that's just like totally not the point.
Mhm.
So it's keeping me in check. Go ahead.
It's well said. I think for the feminine side of our species, there's a term I like: chronic nurturing. It's that motherhood, that a stray dog, for instance, can end up to be 30 stray dogs in a single woman's house, that chronic, the inability to not be able to not care. So it's very important. I like to say we're volunteers, not voluntold. So it's important to know that, you can't answer every call, and nor does the chief or anyone else expect you to. But what you can do is, be there when you can be there. And unfortunately, with a lot of fire departments, and I've heard this from multiple different ones, and I'm actually going to be doing a documentary in the future called Volunteer is the name of the movie, and it's going to be about the volunteer fire service, like an hour and a half documentary. And it's what you get generally is four to eight people or so, depending on the size of your department, are always the ones that always show up, and most of the others don't, except if there's something big enough that, oh, well, I better go because, if I don't, it's going to look bad on my. So there's that side too. There's the side that likes to belong to something, but doesn't necessarily even show up. Maybe it's because they're busy or, traveling or doing things like that. But so it tends to be in any organization at that, there's a core group of people that generally foot the bill and do a lot of the work, while others not so much. And sometimes that rotates too. Sometimes people will do a lot of things for a couple years or so, and then they back away and somebody else comes in and fills the spot. But I know with chronic nurturing, it can be dangerous, especially to the health of a person, to be overly extended into assisting others, which you have to find balance. Again, it's what I love about the Russells' work is that they emphasize balance as being the one law. And as long as you're aware of that, that you have to give to yourself in an equal capacity what you give to others. And if your barometer is somewhere in the middle, floats a little bit to the left or the right, you're staying on par. But nobody's going to be able to help anybody to any good degree or beneficial degree if they first don't help themselves. And so, you got to be aware of the shadow side of the nurturer, that chronic nurturer, which, allows for somebody just to come and drop their baby off and I'm out of here. See, I'm going to the bar. Thanks for watching. But you didn't even call me. You didn't even ask me. So sometimes you got to put up your roadblock or clearly identify your boundaries and let it be known without shame, without remorse, and without guilt. Because if you don't, you can easily be taken advantage of, and you'll find that that's a repetitive thing and it will strain and stress you. So balance is the key.
You got it. Yeah, the chronic nurturing really is a problem. It becomes an obsessive and a compulsive kind of thing, which actually is the shadow of the next upcoming archetype. So it's a little bit of a foreshadowing of that lover energy that, when you don't know what to do with yourself, when you're uncomfortable with yourself, when you are trying to avoid your own inner or outer work, it's inevitable that you'll get some idea like, oh, I'm worrying about so-and-so. I wonder how they're doing. Or, if you get those calls from people, oh, I just intuitively felt I needed to call you and check on you and see if you're okay. That's a nurturer's shadow, right? It's like you are yourself having an inner experience that you need to deal with first before you run after somebody and try to, like check on them. I don't know if that's happened to you at all, but it's kind of an interesting nuance is what I notice with this archetype. It's highly nuanced. And then you also mentioned the ability not to care, which I find very interesting, also highly nuanced. And I wonder if that's also something that's a little bit more in the masculine wheelhouse. Now, do you want to talk more about that? Because you're obviously not a cold person. You're not somebody who turns people away. Every time I reach out to you, you respond, and in a good time as well. So that that ability to care. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? How that
Sure.
man's eyes, especially.
Yeah. Caring's such a loaded term, but really to me, and this is what I think could turn all of our games around in terms of what we're dealing with. This call it New World Order, whatever you want to call it, the elite, the global, the thing that's going to make the difference at the end of the day to me is when people start to care. They just, anything good in this world comes from a place of caring. If mothers didn't care for their children, my God, what would happen? Babies wouldn't make it past a few months if they didn't have at least a modicum of caring and nurturing. So I think in a sense, a lot of the caring begins with the mother, the feminine aspect, because that's the first thing to hold a baby is the mom, and it's not the dad generally, or if it is, it's handed to the mother very quickly. But the mother is the role of the nurturer in nature by nature's determination. Men have a different approach to it. They can be colder, but then again, they're not moms. They don't have breasts, at least not real men. So there's that, you're actually feeding the being that comes into this world as a feminine, as a mother, where men don't have that. They need to go out and hunt the food source and bring it back and they build the castle walls to protect their queen, their feminine. So they do have a little less of a caring side, and they do have an ability to be cold when needed. But I don't think, you can't, and I like to say this too about the fire service, they call us first responders, not first reactors, for a reason. I mean, if we all showed up to a vehicle accident and there are children involved and there's bodies laying around, the last thing you want is all the firefighters and EMTs crying and standing around hugging each other because they're emotionally distraught. You put that on hold. You have to, because there's a mission to accomplish. You're there to, stabilize life, rescue people, make the highway safe so there's no further accidents, no further injuries, things like that. We're trained to do this. We go through hours and hours and hours, weeks and months in some cases. And I'm lightly trained compared to some of the guys I run with. And there's some that have gone through literally, Fire 1 and 2 and all these other classes and courses to reach the levels they reach. And those are my mentors on the fire scene. I pay attention. I watch, just even being a lieutenant after 7 years, there's still so much I don't know and so much that I can learn. But as for the when to be cold, I wouldn't necessarily call it a cold approach, but to me, it's like you just have to be able to turn the emotion off. There'll be later time when you can deal with that. And that's also a very real thing too, because you don't want to be cold on the response and when you need to be, and then continue to be cold when you get home. You got to process what it is you saw, what it is you went through. I've heard stuff, on the Virginia side, guys seeing accidents with decapitations, things like that are just beyond the pale. How do you deal with that after you see that? And then you go home to your children, you got to process that stuff. So there's that need to warm up to the pain and the trauma of your own experience in reacting to trauma, or responding to trauma. You're going to have your own sort of need to respond to your own processing, which takes place as well. And it's all good questions, and it's part of what makes people human, is that we have these emotions that are there, but in many instances, especially in the first responder field of work, you have to be able to put that to the side to do the job you're there to do. And that can often be difficult, but it should never be ignored that the impact of an emotional thing might come later, and to make sure you process that, let it out, cry if you have to, whatever it is. But it never deters people that I've served with from continuing to serve. They find that the need to serve their community is above and beyond even the need to serve their own emotions at the end of the day. And that's also a fine balance.
Oh, there's a lot in there that I really love. Yeah, the serving, even serving the emotions, because if it is possibly just our bad training, or it's just really difficult, that we do unconsciously serve our emotions and we put them first and can lose sight of the situation at hand. Now, this is a good example of the difference between men and women. There was one time, maybe I even told you already, my nephew fell off a really tall thing and got a compound fracture. And it was a major emergency in a campground, so kind of remote and no hospital close by, and needed a helicopter. And I was the one to call the first responders. Well, I couldn't barely keep it together. I was just choking out the words literally. So I, wanted to cry and lose it. Now it was interesting because I managed to gain mastery enough to coach my nephew to a place of being able to manage his pain much better, amazingly well, actually. So I managed to get it together. And it was Ben Balderson the other day said how the mastery over the emotional world is desirable and is much easier for a man, right? So we think of women as being so much more adept in the emotional world, but the mastery isn't necessarily there. So the only thing is that you got the fine line between mastery and suppression. So like you said, that sometimes that, okay, we have to put this aside right now and deal with what is in front of us. And then, making that return, which is also a pretty warrior U-turn back to, oh, there's some injury here, right? When you witness great trauma, it traumatizes you, right? Do you think that's an inevitability that it just does, or are there certain people that it's not going to affect?
Well, there's career firefighters, as well as volunteers that I know have been serving for 25 plus years, who have made a career out of the firefighting field, you could say, or emergency medical technician response. And they've seen everything. I mean, and you ask them, how do you do it? What keeps you going? And they say you get used to it. And it's almost, how can you get used to seeing just one trauma after another? And it's not really a desensitization, but it's the professional conduct that comes with the job. And it's more than a job for a lot of people. It's something they're called to do, and again, it's in each one of these people's lives, there's the need for that balance. And I'm sure nobody's ever not shed a tear in an entire field of professional firefighting or otherwise, but it's probably more common than we hear. It's just not often talked about. That the last thing you want to do is go to the fire station and say, I cried the other night because of what I saw in that accident, but it's probably a silent observation or a silent knowledge that they know, that everybody there knows, that what we see in the field can be traumatic, devastating, hard. And I'll never forget, I'll just give you a personal story. One call we responded to in Virginia on a mountainside. Of course, there's a lot of mountains in the area I serve, the Blue Ridge Mountains to be precise, but I believe it was an early February call, and it was, there was snow on the ground, and it was a wood cabin. It had a husband, wife, and their young daughter, who had to be all of 5 years old, I think. And by the time we get there, and this is one of the things people also have to realize about rural fire departments, especially volunteer rural fire departments, is many of the calls we show up to, by the time we get there, because we're not on site at the station to respond immediately, we have to drive our personal vehicles. We run lights and sirens to get to the station. Then we got to get out, get our suits on, and then get in the trucks and then go. So we're 10 minutes, 15 minutes behind, like a district who is paid by the taxpayers to be on site to respond. If there's an alarm drops or a tone drops, they're instantly, within 1 minute, they're in the vehicles and rolling out the door. So by the time we get to a lot of these fires, they're already fully engulfed. And so it's recovery at that point. We're there to basically salvage, and just make sure we get the fire put out. And it usually requires dumping many, many hundreds or actually many thousands of gallons of water. You can use 30,000 gallons of water for some of these, and that's equivalent of 10 tankers, each carrying 3,000 gallons. And a lot of these places don't have fire hydrants, so we have to haul the water through the tankers to get them there. And it's one tanker after the next filling dump tank, which they back up, dump the water, and we just keep pumping it out onto the fire. But I'll never forget, this gentleman was on his hands and knees, and his wife was standing next to him, and his baby girl was next to him, and he just bursts into tears. He's watching everything he owned go up in flames, and all he had time to even grab was her little tricycle. And she looks at him, and I'm standing there, I'm pulling hose, but I'm just happened to be there, and I noticed, and he was crying so hard, snot was coming out of his nose. And she says, "Daddy, it's okay. You saved my bike." And that, man, it was at that point, I was like, oh my God, even this little child who can't comprehend the loss of everything, right, saw something positive at that moment. And that, that, yeah, here comes my processing. But that gave me hope, in some way, shape, or form. At the lowest time, for one man's life, the little girl was just like, "But Dad, you saved my bike," And so
Wow.
it was yeah, it makes you stop and think, how much that we really have to enjoy, and I think that's one of the big lessons too, in that, he even got up later and he said to one of the other firefighters, he goes, I'd like to go get a 6-pack. He goes, "I'd like to have a beer." And he said, "I just want to thank all you guys for coming out and doing this," even though he lost everything. So it took, I think we were on that call for 4.5 hours. So I didn't get home till 5:30 in the morning. But, that's the nature. As a volunteer, you're on call 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, unless you're out of service, and you got to check out when you do that. If you're traveling, if you're off, you're going to be gone from the coverage area for however long. But it's a very humanizing thing to, to witness something like that. As little as it is, it's as real as it gets. And this isn't romper room. This isn't artificial reality or artificial intelligence. This is real human beings suffering a loss of immense proportions. And then just it affects everybody from the top down to the bottom. And but again, I think too that there's been calls where people have thanked us. They'll buy lunch. They'll even offer to take us to dinner. They're like, "You guys are great. Thank you so much." Brush fires, we save structures, we save things from going up in flames. There was a call in Virginia where 30 something plus acres burned on the side of a mountain, and there were 4 crews running, and we ended up saving 7 homes from destruction, $1 million homes, and so a lot of times you don't get thanked, but the point of it is that it's always the guys that I've served with that keep me coming back, because it's the appreciation that they have. And these guys aren't conspiracy own podcasts, and they don't really care about, necessarily the politics, even though they favor one candidate over another. They're not what I would say are truth movement people. They're not in a truth movement. They're not even investigating the truth. They just want to serve their community. And that's at the base level what motivates them. They have kids to raise and jobs to work. And, there's nothing as special about them that makes them want to, try to be anything but what they're doing and part of their station, which is, to serve their community in that way. So, but yeah, that's now that I think about it and talk about it, I haven't actually told anybody this to that degree besides Lori, but it hit me emotionally there. So
Me
can't
too.
deny that.
Me too. Yeah. Yeah. A few tears in the chat here as well. Going on. Crying is greatly underrated, Steve says. And it's it's a discharge, right? That the emotions are a charged pocket of life energy, freedom energy in your body. And if it can't move, then it's like creates this zzz electrical short out that eventually will come at the perfect moment, at the perfect time, right? Like, even though being on a podcast doesn't seem like the perfect time to process emotion, but you never know when life is going to inspire that. And yeah, Michelle said that I would be more concerned if there wasn't crying over what is witnessed. And everybody has their own path too. It doesn't necessarily, healing isn't necessarily tears. Every single experience, maybe it makes you mad, right? Like that there's some injustice or there's some lack, or, why couldn't you be full-time paid, for example, so you weren't 10 minutes behind? I don't know if
Mhm.
you ever have those thoughts that certain communities can only afford a volunteer fire department, for example, and they are all doors to go through and transform and heal from what ails us. And thank you, Yvonne. I appreciate that. Uh, I thought what was so interesting about your story is it demonstrates another layer of the nurturer, that when the father was suffering so desperately after the huge loss, now the child doesn't suffer that loss as much because they haven't learned to identify with everything. She's identified with her dad. And
Mhm.
then what does she immediately do when he expresses his pain? Is she comforts him.
Right.
She gives him props,
Yep.
right? And those nurturers are born in exactly those moments. And I think that's one of the reasons the nurturer is so incredibly common, is because our parents suffered. And we saw that. And it's not, you can't just sit back. That's what I often say. Like, you can't just sit back and watch people suffer without becoming involved in some way. We have a hard wiring to care for each other and to reduce suffering. So
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
That's what makes us great in terms of being human. I think it's, a lot of other species show that it's a form of empathy in action, and sympathy is great, but why sit around pitying people? Empathy actually feels. So it's one thing I always loved about the Russell teachings too, is they said God has no compassion. And I had to sit with that for a long time. I'm like, well, interesting. The Buddhists all say, compassion, blah, 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 do this, do that. But when it came to me, it occurred to me that if God is love, then why would he pity anything? You know, it's the empathy is the love of a human heart in action, you could say. Because when you emphasize with something, you're feeling what that being feels, because it's translatable through the heart, versus just pitying, oh, I feel sorry for that thing through my head, because that's how I'm trained to be compassionate, where empathy is what you feel when you actually feel what somebody feels. If that makes any sense. There is a distinction, but not to say that it's not good to pity or to have um, concern for other beings in a compassionate sort of way. But I think the term empathy trumps the term compassion, if you will, because it's more hands-on. You're more involved with it. But you did mention, why aren't we paid to volunteer, or why can't a volunteer department become a paid department? Well, it depends on the tax base, and if you're in rural areas, and the reason rural areas have more volunteer fire departments than, say, a city or a suburb, or outlying area of a city subdivision, for instance, or small city in a larger county, is because you have to vote on that. The people, the taxpayers have to vote to create a district. A district is different from a volunteer department in that districts are funded by the taxpayer, whereas volunteer departments have to work to collect every dime that they get. And a lot of departments is why I'm so interested to help with the volunteer movie idea, is I want to get the awareness into people's minds that all of these volunteer departments, fire departments that are dotted across the world, in most cases, especially in the United States, depend wholly on donations, or membership dues being paid. And they barely have enough to provide their firefighters with the right gear. I mean, if somebody was to come and inspect our gear, they would go, you guys are at least 20 years behind on the new gear. So we're really running with gear that wouldn't be allowed on a district because it's not safe. But we can't afford, what what new bunker gear costs for one firefighter? About $7,000.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Because you're talking special construction, knitting, special materials, NFPA approved, So it's all a matter of, what can one afford? And sometimes you go without a certain truck because there's a repair that's too expensive to make to it. So you're down one vehicle. But for the most part, what's great about communities and what we do on both these departments, and I've seen many people in their communities come together to support these departments. And, I volunteered to build websites for both of the departments I serve on. And within the first 45 days of the department in Virginia, they raised over $4,500 in donations just through the website, which paid for the website, which only cost a couple $100 to get started. So, I mean, these are the things, even as a volunteer, I'm volunteering in other ways besides wearing the bunker gear and going out on calls. There's many little things you can do to help, and they are really a heart of a community. And again, if there's a natural disaster, that's where everybody goes to figure out what to do, and I would recommend everybody get, related to it somehow. You can go there, find out what their meeting dates are, or you can contact them through their phone numbers, leave a message, say, hey, I'd like to help. I don't want to run fire calls or respond to emergency calls, but I can help, with a fundraiser. Take my number down and keep me in mind. And what's really great about volunteering and at the end of the day is you come home and you have a sense of, it's not like self-worth. It's not just helping others. It's a mix of both of those. And it's sort of my cup runneth over feeling. The people are always on volunteer departments thanking you, thank you for coming out and helping. And it's that you have at the end of the day when your head hits the pillow and you say to yourself, it really feels good to be appreciated. And not from an egotistical point of view, but from an actual showing up, and a lot of people can give money. A lot of people can be philanthropists, but they don't show up to what they're giving the money to. So it's kind of a hollow giving. Why we need the term philanthropist if you're there showing up, So Russell always said too that the philanthropists are great, but it would be better if the man showed up, gave money, and actually helped with what he was giving the money to. He would be more appreciated. So that term wouldn't be as important, you could say. But so there's all kinds of ways to give, but I think the volunteer model, again, it needs to be revisited and people, because one thing that makes these communities and a place like the United States great in many ways was the volunteer base. And it happens at churches. It happens through all kinds of civic and local organizations. And there's so much to do from that aspect, but there's many different ways one can find to volunteer and serve their community. And it's rewarding spiritually as much as it is mentally and physically.
Beautiful. I love that. Just thinking about a few things. Volunteering is, if you look at the public and the private domain, it's definitely the private, right? That's how hospitals were run, based on the community they were serving, and people would give to the hospital and the hospital would care for people when they need it. And it was all self-contained in the private domain. Whereas now, I have a fire respondent unit right across the street from me, and I don't have anything to do with it. I've never knocked on the door. I've never met the people, except in the one case when we had a fire on my balcony and somebody phoned the fire department, and they came right in with their suits up and put that barbecue out. But our desire to stay more private is really important. And if people lose sight of that, then we end up feeding our whole private life over to the public, which unfortunately it shouldn't be a problem. But because our private and public are so badly out of balance, then we have to look at, okay, where can we take responsibility for ourselves? And volunteering is the way that you just show up. And I also want to emphasize your point about that difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy to me is a way to stay separate from someone. When you feel sorry for them, when you pity them, it's all about separation. And that's why it's so easy as a philanthropist to put your money from a distance, and you just send it electronically or anonymously. Because a lot of people don't even want to be known as a helper. Why? Because they're going to come back to you and think you're going to keep helping. And yeah, the empathy is really the front line. It's kind of like you deciding that where the need arises, you're going to get in the burning building, and you're going to be right in the trenches with them. And that's what empathy is to me. When you're willing to feel someone else's feeling, because it's pain, right? That it's no lack of pain when people suffer. And I know as a coach, that's in fact what I do all day is people come to me with the places that they're suffering. And at the end of my day as well, the incredible satisfaction from that, and the call to do my own work and keep myself stable and my nervous system good, because that's a really big gatekeeper with all of that emotion running through your system. And the very beautiful, I would call this the next archetype, the lover, where there's such beauty in the connection that comes through suffering. Not because of suffering, but in that moment where it was called, that they were suffering and you showed up. And that's priceless. That's something that I will take to my dying days and never regret having felt deeply for somebody. So that's beautiful. I really love that you know about that. And
It's well said. The sympathy part, every emotion you could say has a positive and a shadow, or a light and a shadow side. So yeah, it's over empathizing. That needle hits the red, and you're literally feeling what everybody's feeling, and you can't stop crying from one day to the next, because you're over emotionalizing everything and internalizing and over feeling everything. So again, I just connote to the balance there that, it is good sometimes to just, obviously look at Oklahoma and what happened there with the tornadoes, or Nebraska or other places where entire towns were wiped out. Right now, as we speak, there's probably hundreds of EMS and firefighters going through rubble and working, and crews and emergency crews trying to, salvage and make sense of the roads and get things cleaned up. So in a sense, emphasizing the importance of the difference between empathy and sympathy. We have sympathy for those towns, but we can't really emphasize because we're not there in the middle of it, but there's just, it's an important demarcation you brought up there, because everything has a positive and a negative side, and you got to be very careful which one you feed, and don't feed one too often over the other. It's always a very intricate active balance that keeps one from going insane, you could say, or losing their touch.
yeah, how I've learned to see that with the emotions is that you either naturally go through them, say like children do when they haven't been trained to suppress their emotions really strongly yet. They just go through them, and it's a storm, and then the storm is over, and it's pretty quick. But what people end up doing is they either avoid that altogether, or they get stuck in that door. Because to me, that's what the emotions are. Into and of themselves, they are, you can see what they are. Anger is destructive. People talk about good anger. Even in my book, I'm still writing about righteous anger. And there's a certain truth to it, but it's the anger that moves. The anger that you let go is the righteous anger, not the anger that you hold on to and you stay all mired down in all day long, thinking about everybody that you're angry at. So yeah, it's a very fine line, let's say. One of the things that when you were talking also, I was reminded of strategic helping and selective helping, because if you are that kind of nurturer that everybody's going to turn to and everybody runs to when they've got any little problem, you're the person for one reason or another. And then knowing how you help and who you help can be a very good way to go. So to me, all of that is guided by sacred purpose. And I'm curious, how did you make your way? I see you, for example, in your Telegram group is a beautiful little group. Totally recommend people join if they're deep, because there's no light. I mean, there's light discussions, there's joking around and stuff like that. You got quite a riff on the Tartaria, and it turned into tartar sauce and all those kind of things. But I do see your nurturing quality in that group. You know, you're containing it. There's even not to feminize it, but there's a sort of mother hen about it, about the channel itself, the integrity of it, and the purpose of it. So, do you want to share anything on that?
Sure. Yeah, it got away from me in the beginning. I had more people coming in and dropping links that were completely unassociated with anything I was posting, but I wanted it to be more of a channel where things could be discussed topically, you know, as opposed to just people coming by and what I call billboarding your chat room, you know, just dropping off a link to their favorite podcasts and then leaving and never coming back, you know, just because, you know, stuff that's totally unrelated. Like if you're having a conversation with someone, they barge in and go, "Hey, there's a sale down at Sears, half off on all weed eaters. I'm out of here. See ya." You know, be like, dude, what are you doing? You just come in right in my room and interrupt our conversation and then bolt out the door. I don't give a damn what Sears has on sale. You know, it's like, so you have to establish some sort of rules to keep a conversation flowing. And yeah, one thing I'm also not bitter about, but I'm very careful to just buy into any of the latest conspiracy stuff. Conspiracy isn't something to believe in, it's something to research, and it can take years and years before you even come to a decision about the subject you're researching. So I noticed that with a lot of people, there's this mass movement. The need to belong to something is more the driver for a lot of these conspiracy groups, Flat Earth Tatari in particular. They come with their own set of lingo. They have their own certain places that you're not allowed to question the sacred cows. You know, and to me, isn't that what you guys just left? Is the belief of a sacred cow, and now you've got a new sacred cow. You melted down the gold, but then reformed it. What if it's none of the things you think it is? And with Tataria, I did a simple 20-minute search on construction photos for the 1904 World's Fair. And I just happened to run across the World's Fair Society, which I believe my grandfather was part of that society back in the 60s when he worked downtown in St. Louis. And, you know, this kind of stuff, people, if they just did 10 minutes of research, could find that, you know, they never show you the construction photos in any of the Tartaria videos, the actual construction of these things when they were being built, you know, and they're not NASA fraud photos, guys. They're actual physical photos that were scanned at high resolution and uploaded to database. And they have society built around preserving, you know, what were traveling fairs. These fairs travel, and they were known for building temporary constructions, and you can build these kinds of constructions in a 2-year time frame, you know. And I'm somebody who's witnessed the history of the building of Swannanoa, which was James Dooley's gift to his wife Sally. It hosts the largest Tiffany stained glass window in the world, and it was built by 300 artisans between 1910 and 1912. It's got 52 rooms, and it's made of solid marble with intricate wood carvings. And 300 guys did this in just less than 2 years. So yeah, these things can be done. And the danger in believing that it can't and that it's somehow separate of our own abilities really speaks to where they have us in terms of how we view ourselves as incapable nitwits that don't have the ability to construct incredible architecture. That's because most of the children in the Western world in these days have grown up around communistic kinds of architecture. They take the romance out of the building and make it like just look at the FBI building in Washington, D.C. It's a monstrosity of architecture, and it represents its very nature as oppressive, you know, and so people get oppressed by the buildings. Strip malls are oppressive. My God, has anybody looked at a strip mall lately? I mean, when's the last time you saw something beautiful in terms of architecture? And so that living in that kind of a construct depletes human imagination and robs you of your ability to imagine a world of intricate detail and spiritually uplifting architecture. And so we see these pictures of structures from World's Fairs and things like that. And we think, my God, that must have been some advanced species. That's not us. And in 100 years, we're going to look back at the St. Louis Arch and go, man, that 1,000-year-old structure, somebody really advanced built that. It's just, I see us going down the path of idiocracy to where, we're watering our plants with Gatorade, and we believe that everything that was once capable by our own two hands is now out of reach, and so that's what I'm fighting against. You could say it's what I'm trying to nurture, the belief in the self, that humans are great and can build these kinds of things in those kinds of time frames, and that there is evidence that you can look at. And I'm going to make a trip to hopefully interview someone from the World's Fair Society and visit the Missouri Natural History Museum as well to photograph some of these things. And also just to show that, if you do a little bit of research into something, you can quickly come to the conclusion with evidence, right? It's not just me saying, one way or another, but you don't have to buy hook, line, and sinker into the idea that all history is horseshit, because while a lot of it is, much of it is not. And so again, don't be too shadowed about history, and don't be too in the light of history that you think all history is true or all history is false. It's always somewhere in the middle. Balance is never at the pole.
Right on. Yeah. And one of the superpowers of that nurturer is tough love. And that's what I see you giving when people come in and they're baby in the bathwater with the history or whatever subject it is, just completely outright rejecting because it was written, sometime by some elite. And then the delivering of the tough love. And I notice with a lot of humor and kindness, but very straight, kind of unmistakable that you're giving them a little slap.
Yeah.
Like
yeah,
the,
well,
yeah.
There's some hills I'll die on. But, again, I wrote about certainty. The most certain thing you can be certain of is what is your life's purpose, and that's a great kind of certainty. But then there's the certainty of what we think are facts and other things, which can turn out to be wrong. I mean, I'm not saying that somebody might come along and there's unmistakable evidence that either, the earth is a certain shape or that Tataria is actually real. I'm not afraid to be wrong either, but I do like to assert points of view based on evidence and based on, concrete research. And it doesn't take long to debunk some of these things out there. But again, that's the beauty of humanity. We don't all have to agree on everything all of the time. You should see the fights that take place in the fire departments. I've seen people get in fits of rage, throw their chair and walk out the building and say, I'm never coming back. You guys have fun with this. Week later, they're back. How do we help the department? We all have this, and it's in every organization. There's a lot of that. You get humans together, more than two people together, there's likely to be an argument about something. Try living with somebody, right? I mean, have a relationship with a loved one. It starts right there. And there's no two people I know that just always got along, except for that rare couple of 75 years together who said, we've never had an argument. That might be the one needle in the haystack, but for the most part, people, have to get along with each other, and that can often be difficult, but there's always a balance there as well too.
Right. And I have a gift of being able to relate everything to the nurturer, because one of the problems they're going to suffer is the fear of conflict. So coming up against anybody, especially to make a boundary, to take care of themselves and get things energetically straight, then the shadow nurturer will avoid that at all cost. And they are afraid of how they're going to be seen when they create some conflict or they bring some conflict that was already there to awareness. So that's such a skill, not to be ruled by that fear. And because then it turns into your nurturing turns into a kind of virtue signaling where you are making sure everybody loves you and they're all approving of you. And this is actually the precipice on the hero's journey. It's the precipice between a more ego-centered driven to a more soul-centered driven. Now, I always will say that the ego is not lesser or negative inherently. It's just a different disposition. But you are really being confronted by that tendency to look out and go, am I okay? Am I okay? Am I okay? Oh, could I help you so I could be seen as okay? And that's a really insidious underlying shadow, very hidden. When I say shadow, it just means you cannot see that about yourself, where you're actually giving to get something, right? That there are people out there. I have a friend that died of cancer not too long ago, and he made his whole entire life about helping and serving. I'll make a couple of different points with this one and then I learned recently that he lost his life to cancer at a pretty young age. And just looking at, and he was always very attached to helping. And then there were times where I even took advantage of him as a helper, like, oh, I need help with a freezer. Could Donnie do it? And then, I was just like, he'd be my first person on my mind. And then he dies young of all of this service that he gave. And there was two things I think missing, not to take him down or put, bad taste on anything that he gave, but I think he was one of those that never found his purpose, right? Because purpose is, to me, the biggest cure for the nurturer. That if you really know yourself, how you're wired, what your gifts are, then you're going to survive as a nurturer. But if you don't, then everybody taking advantage of you, I think, becomes much more easy. Not to let myself off the hook like that was somehow a good thing. But what do you think of that, Matt?
It's well said. Yeah, again, it's a fallacy to think you won't run into confrontation from time to time. I mean, just leaving your door, going out into the world, reminds me of that scene from The Hobbit. It's or the Lord of the Rings. It's a dangerous thing going out your door, Frodo. But that's what an adventure is, right? And the littlest things can be perceived in the most intricate of ways. And confrontation, I've noticed there's several accounts that I've followed and do follow on X or otherwise that seek at all costs to avoid any confrontation at all whatsoever. And they ultimately become boring because there's no wave motion to it. It's just like one neutral wave. And if I wanted to live in a flatline universe with no 180 degrees above and below is awesome. What would surfing be without a wave? Would anybody do it? Would anybody drag a surfboard just to stand on a flat ocean and not move? It's the waves that make it interesting and fun, and you never know what you're going to get when you go out your door. And when those tones drop for a firefighter and we're off, we don't know what we're going into. And the first few calls I ever went on, I could hardly breathe. I get there and I'm like, holy crap, my adrenaline's overtaking me. And you're riding down the road and you see a 2-mile high black cloud just rolling violently up in the air. And it's like, man, I'm going to that. So it's
Fast.
So with confrontation and the need to keep things cool all the time, I think it's sort of a form of self-delusion, because it's almost like you're not allowing yourself to really feel at that point. And sometimes you have to feel, like you said in your comment, the sexiest man I've known can hold it together and be self-controlled, immune to the feminine storms of chaos. And Lori reads this to me. I go, I wanted to read you that quote, but I was going to wait because I knew you'd see that quote and read it to me. And I go, but in truth, honey, no man can contain you. And I'll wager $10,000 that there is no man who can contain my Lori for 5 minutes. But that's the beauty of the quote, is that you want to get sexy, guys. You got to learn to understand how that feminine storm of chaos works. But there's also the storms of emotional chaos that we all encounter in individuals in our experiences daily. There's times I've heard these stories from, I think, a couple guys on each different department, but that they'd roll up on a burning house, a mobile home, and it's a meth lab. And what is the owner doing? He's trying to fight the firefighter, from going in there. He's trying to stop them. Literally, sometimes you roll up and they attack you, and one guy rolled up in a driveway, and the owner, because the trucks are so big, he hit a branch and it broke the branch. The guy had a fit and threatened to shoot the firefighter. So you never know what you're going to run into. There's the uncontrollable, and there's the storms of chaos, and all of us have that propensity to express those storms from time to time. But there's also the fallacy of trying to keep it all together all the time. Sometimes it's good to lose it, man. Go out in the woods, yell at a tree. If it helps you feel better, put on the boxing gloves, hit the bag for a while, do 1,000 push-ups, whatever it takes. Working out, I've found, is really good for stress relief for myself. And at 53, I'm trying to keep it together, but not so much from keep emotionally neutral and dull through everything, but just be more centered in the way that I live life. I don't have to go all the way to the edge of the wave, one direction or the other, to have a good human experience. I can go a little bit this direction, a little bit that direction, and that can be a very rich life.
Oh, that's a perfect setup when you're talking about going to the edge of the wave, and the nurturer suffers, the pendulum swings, right? Helping everyone, helping no one, because they crash and burn, and then they forget, they have amnesia, and because their nature is to help, they go and they help everyone again and get into that exact same extreme thing that really doesn't work. And just to follow up also, it's, that we're not meant to be automatons, and being a master of your emotions doesn't mean that you go flat. That's what, unfortunately, meds do to you, and that's what makes people catatonic and quite unresponsive to their world. And there's one quote from the guy that I studied with in India, who I can't recommend at all, but he said, "Get wet when it rains." It's raining, get wet. Or you drove your car in the mud, get muddy, right? Don't pretend or spiritualize your way out of, oh, this was good that that I'm up to my eyeballs in mud or anything like that, to feel it and to use it, right? That I often muse about the way that the nurturer has this really emotional component. And I've got in fact, I'm talking to Freeman on Thursday. I'm going to be on Freeman talking about the nurturer, and I just happened to,
Oh, cool.
yeah, I just happened to message him at some point, and he's going like, "Beth, I can't even believe how synchronistic this is. Would you believe I have 11 cats?" Like you were talking about the women with the dog, and he's having some nurturer blues, and he's been having to manage this abundance of the life force in his house, and it's really hard on him because he feels so not to create suffering and to take care. And for some reason, the cats are at his window. Like there was literally 4 cats would come every day and look at him in his window, but they're not looking in other people's windows, or maybe they are. You can't tell. So that part of us that literally attracts that. People know. My mom was one of those. She was just sitting there minding her own business. And for some reason, everybody's always asking for her assistance. And she ended up completely denying her nurturer, inner workings, because she was so mad that everybody was always trying to take advantage of her. So she did not see herself as a nurturer, and she would portray herself as not a nurturer. I also had that until, I was probably 45 myself when I finally saw this archetype. It was hidden from me. It was totally there. It's not that it wasn't there. It was just completely hidden from me. And, that's where we've been unfortunately trained to protect ourselves. And it all adds up to unconscious choices that if once you see them from a conscious light, you're going to make new choices in that arena. So yeah, the last thing, that the certainty about purpose, I wanted to talk about, that you said several times. I've heard you say that and repeat it, and I'm absolutely down with that. And how did you get to that place in your life where you could be so selective and protective over your nurturing energy, so you put it in places it was actually effective? I think I rhymed a lot of times there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's just, I got to tell you, my mom had 7 kids, 6 boys and a girl. And I just talked to her yesterday. She's wonderful at 88 and she's sharp as a tack. Her mind is as sound as can be, and she looks very young for her age. And she mentioned to me that she said, Matt, the greatest years of my life were between the ages of 65 and 75. And I thought to myself, what Russell used to say was great men come alive at 40, great men and women, that is. And so the best years are always ahead of us. And now I've got even more to look forward to. So, um, how she did manage 7 kids when my dad worked and she would have to shuffle them to school. It's 4 boys basically at one time. That's probably why my dad balded so early. But, having to discipline 4 boys through the 70s, late 60s and 70s, and the blue jean days and the pot smoking days and it's the greasers. All my brothers were like greasers versus socias. If you remember the movie The Outsiders or the book. But so that's how I grew up too. We had a sister in between them, and then myself and my little brother. But I got to credit my mom for doing the great job that she did and having kept a balance throughout her life. My dad passed at 62 years old back in 93. I was 21 at the time, so I never really got to ask him the great existential questions that, it led me to want to have to develop bonds and relationships with older men who I tend to like older men and older people in general because of the wisdom they possess. And I found myself always more enjoying the company of older people, my elders, versus the youngers, because their conversations were more interesting. The lines on their faces were more detailed and complex, meaning they've lived, they've experienced things. And so it was always through the elder generations that I got wisdom lessons that I wasn't able to get directly from losing my dad at such a young age. But there's been figures in my life who have helped me develop and learn to see, again, with it's sort of a nurturing. When you take somebody under your wing to mentor them, for instance, that's a form of nurturement. And between men, that's something that, doesn't really happen all that often. But you see it in the structures of military. You see it in the structure, which the fire department itself, its structure is a military structure. It has rank, but in the sense that when you're part of that and you belong to it, you're looked over by your higher ups, and respect is earned in all these instances. And it's not, people think of the military or this command and control structure as being oppressive. That's the communist view. It's all male dominated oppressiveness. No, it's much more than that. It's more like Plato and Aristotle relationship. There's a lot of wisdom, a lot of nuggets that transfer back and forth in the male aspect of that nurturement, because you're training, you're learning, you're expanding your mind, you're gaining new skills and new knowledge. And whether it's a school of wisdom or a school of firefighting, it's still a tiered organization that is based around, in a sense, natural law, you could say, because some things in nature are more dominant than others within a species. You can call it the silverback, for instance, has dominion over his little clan and nobody challenges them. And if they do, they learn very quickly, or they get tested, or, so there's that too. There's the natural aspect of the nurturer, but it is really, at the end of the day, all a balancing act. And again, the more aware you are of your ability to balance in these different kinds of expression, and all that goes with it, really, it's something you have to really hone, and it takes years and years. And so the good side is that our best years are always still ahead of us. There's no reason to ever fret that, oh, I'm too old, I can't do this. Or, I mean, you are what you tell yourself at the end of the day. So always keep that mind open enough that not so much your brains fall out, but that you have the possibility of enjoying life well into your older years. And my mom did say past 75 and into her age at 88, she goes, I'm finding that my mind wants to do things and my body's going, can't do that anymore. But even then, she's really lived such a great life, and as a nurturer for her, and to tell the stories that she does about me, I want to interview her someday, just
Oh,
to have her on to tell those stories, and people understand a little more how I got so screwed up. No, I'm just kidding. How I actually had stability, through a great nurturer as my mom and my dad for the time he was here. But yeah, all these things are just part and parcel to the learning experience, and life truly does get better with age. And don't forget that, folks, because it's a building process, and it takes a long time to say anything in old Intish.
I totally agree with that. Absolutely, that the time is not a curse; it is a blessing. And I often am thinking back to certain problems I used to have, ways I used to suffer, relationships would go weird, and how much progress. Oh my goodness, like there's so much over the years. It's really astonishing how many of those challenges or adversaries, obstacles could be overcome. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's a beautiful thing when I look at the comparison even of my son who's 17 going on 18, and he was a difficult kid in some ways, and I don't mean to brand him that way, but we had struggles actually, like that, and a lot of stuff, and right now it's just so harmonious. We're like water, we're just going together, and he's gained so much self-awareness and ability to be responsive to his environment, and so much unspoken positive communication and joking around, like not knocking heads like we used to. It's a really beautiful thing. So yeah, the nurturing definitely gets better with age. And I just also thought to say that people, it's not a matter of beating yourself up. The nurture can be extremely painful to explore. When you see those shadows, it can be like a knife in your heart because your intention is to serve and give, but there you are causing yourself suffering, and even causing suffering to those you help, believe it or not, can happen through enabling. And so instead of beating yourself up, just commit to awakening and to raising the consciousness enough so that you have the courage to let that pain go, because it doesn't serve anyone for you to be a guilty nurturer. To me, again, that's a means to keep yourself separate from others by staying guilty. So healing
Yeah,
is
it's well
called.
said.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, healing is called for at many levels. And I think this is a very important one. Imagine if we had a world that was full of people with good boundaries.
Mm, what a different world it would be.
It would really be different. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I'm going to share a
One
link.
thing, if I
Of
may, real quick, about
course,
your book that you mentioned, and congrats on the Freeman interview. Tell him I said hello.
I
Um,
will.
we both ran into each other years and years back and didn't know it. Um, but yeah, the book is really, with the different archetypes, we all embody them in some way, shape, and form. Um, but those each have their own pluses and minuses, and we're all a blend of all of them together, which is, I find in the reading of it, that's making sense totally to me. And I'm sure people get that experience themselves through, reading of a Jung or others that speak to the same type of systems. But I think the beauty of archetypes too is that it's a mental construct that we can imagine relatively easily. It doesn't take a super vivid imagination to understand what is a nurturer, what is a lover, for instance, or what is a rebel, and how we all embody the pluses and minuses, the shadow and the light aspects of these different basic personalities or characteristics of a personality, for instance, and how we can be one more one day, some the other. Maybe there's the moon is full and you're more of a lover that night. There's all these little nuances and intricacies, but I just wanted to say that's, one thing I got from your book was that you show how each of these can be embodiments of each other, and they're all aspects. So that really helps to explain it.
Oh, good.
Good,
I'm so
good
glad.
on you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my goal was to simplify it because it was so incredibly complex what I discovered in the inner life. And I thought nobody's ever going to be able to accomplish anything here. It's literally overwhelming to somebody who it was my full-time job for 3 years to look inward. And so, yeah, how could we make this more approachable so people could just get to work and start awakening those aspects of themselves and reclaiming their life force? So, thank you so much.
Mhm.
Totally appreciate that. And yeah, so it's been a wonderful interview. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And if you would like to join Wednesday for the training on getting off the nurturer's pendulum swing, this is a link that would actually support Matt. So this is a way for us to give to each other. He's helping me to get the word out, and then I'm going to be helping him also. So there will be a course coming up after the training. It doesn't start until July, so there's a lot of time to prepare for it. And so if you have a chance to come to the live training, that's great. If you can't come to the live training Wednesday, I will be sending a notice out about the recording, so you'll be able to catch that, no problem. And then those that sign up for the course early on will get an extra added bonus course called Find Your Sacred Purpose, because again, purpose and the nurturer are like best friends. If they can get together and you can be really focused and directed, knowing how you help, who you help, and why you help, and be really clean in those motives, then it will definitely transform the way that you move and live in your life, especially in the world of truth, where we are, I would say, taking on a bigger responsibility than the average person that just wants to, manage their little life. Maybe as a last topic, or anything else that you wanted to mention as well, Matt. What do you think of that?
Oh, that's great. Really, it's just a pleasure to join you again. Thanks so much. And it's always a good, fond memory to remember what we all experienced in Mexico, how cool that was. And um, everybody's on a great path, to do the work that they're here to do. And finding your purpose is part of that path. It may take you years to find your purpose, but if you have it in your heart that you want to, live purposefully, I should say, and on purpose in broader terms, you could, you know, find a lot of the people out there that are doing it and gain the inspiration. Inspiration is a gift that's paid forward from the one who is, working inspired within themselves as well. The best gifts given are often those given to oneself. So just keep the light, keep walking upright, and seize the day, as they say. All things shall come your way where the heart is focused.
That's beautiful. That was actually one question I forgot to ask. And is there anything in Walter Russell's work that really pointed towards our purpose of helping and serving and caring for each other?
Well, the entire philosophy is based on giving for regiving. And they start at the beginning where what is creation but God's giving, in the sense that nature is God's thinking expressed. So God gives his gift of love to create creation, but all of creation is bound to that giving and gives back or re-gives the love given back to God. So that's the cycle in a nutshell. And it's basically the law of balance, which is scientifically defined as giving for regiving. So when your community, or when you've given enough to yourself that you feel your cup runs over, then you're in a position where you can give beyond just your home, or yourself if you live alone. You've got balance and you've attained balance. You can give to your neighborhood. And by giving loving service to your fellow man, that returns upon you. And that's basically the philosophy. And I found it works, really, truly, honestly. And people give out anger. They give out, they flip you off because you are going too slow, and they speed past you and you come up right behind them at the stoplight, but that's, they're always going to see people that are always going to see who don't have that giving for regiving, but rather a taking for retaking. It's, here come the cats, guys. So be careful. But I would just say that, again, the basis of the whole foundation of the universe is the law of love, which is scientifically defined as giving for regiving. And it all starts with you. If you give yourself enough, then you can find yourself in a position to give to others. And the selfless service and the glory of the feeling that comes from that at the end of the day is something that keeps you young and involved and vibrant, and helps grow a community into a place that is desirable to live.
Amen,
And
brother.
yep.
I love that. I love that. And I kept having the image as you were talking of how, we'll plant a seed. God is the one who makes that grow. You don't make it grow. You've just created conditions where it's likely to be able to grow, but it's God that does the growing. And then
Right.
at some point the flower goes, or the plant goes and flowers, and it's like that giving back to God the glory of the wow. Look at what you did, God.
Yep. And
Dude,
every farmer is a nurturer.
big time.
If you
Exactly.
didn't
Oh,
nurture your crops, what would there be of them, right?
exactly. Nothing at all.
Yep.
I know we were at the farm and just like the little manicuring of every little bit, and good sore legs to show for it for a couple of days in a row now, taking care of that. And
There you go.
yeah, it's so well worth it.
If I may, one quick antidote.
Please.
Somebody told this story recently, but there was a farmer, and he moved into a place, and it took him 10 years to get it in order. And the neighbors would come by every once in a while. They go, "Man, your place is looking really good." And so 10 years go by, he has his orchards, everything's rocking and rolling, and the neighbor comes over and he goes, "Bob, you really did, great job on this. It's good that God blessed you with all this stuff. Look at what God's done." He goes, and basically, you know, you've been really blessed. Um, he says to the neighbor, he goes, "Well, you should have seen the place when God was doing it by himself." So really it's man and God working together that makes things beautiful. And that's our power.
That's amazing. Yeah, yeah. I haven't read the book yet, but that God won't work for you, but will work with you
God
is
will not work with you. I'm sorry. God will work with you, but not for you.
not for you. That's Leo
We
Russell,
we
right?
we, we both didn't have enough coffee this morning.
I'm
Yeah,
really glad.
God will work with you, but not for you. It's a wonderful book.
Nice. And please do visit mattpresti.com if you haven't already. He's got a wonderful website, a fantastic channels. The YouTube is really just previewing your full length TEC interviews on Rumble and anywhere else you want to send people. You got Roxanne.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop in a couple links in the chat here.
Please do.
One is to Montauk Rural Fire Department, and
Ah,
that's the website there. Well, actually, I can maybe send those to you, but Montauk, MONTAUK, rural, RURALFD.org, and then RVVFD.org. If anybody can find it in their heart to donate $5 to each of these departments, that would be awesome, because it's all based on, donations that keep these things running, and the volunteers that show up are always needing new gear and things like that. So with that, that's all I'd like to share. And just again, Beth, it's really been great to talk to you, and I appreciate the invite always to come on. So
oh, good. And did I get this right? Montauk, montaukrural.fd.org.
MontaukRuralFD.org, just one dot.
Just one dot. Okay.
Yeah. So
All right.
MontaukRuralFD.org. Yep.
Okay. All right. So I will edit that and drop it in the notes as well, since you're
Super.
taking
Right.
care of them. Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe you can send it to me so I don't guess, because I won't have the
Yeah.
chat.
I'll drop it in the Telegram chat there. That'll be
Okay.
fun.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, it's been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, everyone in the chat. It's been really nice to have you. You found me in the morning, unusual. And I'm going to be on again with Rose 777 tomorrow at 7 p.m. at night. And we'll talk about how she runs Crow 777 like a boss and has
Cool.
exceptionally good boundaries. I've seen that over and over and over again, and it really keeps them running that machine pretty clean. So looking forward to that. All right, my
Awesome.
dears. One last time, I am going to share the link to the training that I'm doing. And if you want to sign up, you're most welcome to do that. Here is the link here. got a really good crowd already, actually, for this. So I'm looking forward to it. Coming up Wednesday at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, getting off the nurturer's pendulum swing so you don't have to suffer the extremes so much anymore. All right, everyone, have a beautiful rest of your day. Bye for now, Matt.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.